Hi, it's Paul Anderson, and this is Life Science Core Idea 1C. It's on matter and energy flow in organisms. And by the time students graduate from high school, they should really have a good understanding of how matter is recycled on our planet and how energy moves through living material and eventually becomes heat. And so if you're teaching this, a good place to start is with plants. And so at the lower elementary grades, you want to start by talking about what do plants need to survive. And basically, they need two things. You need to give them light and you need to give them water. If they don't have those two things, they're going to die right away. But what do animals need? We need plants. And so this mouse is feeding on plants, and this hawk is feeding on the mouse, which fed on the plants. And so that's a good place to start. What are some of the requirements of life? And light and water are a good place to start. But it's more complex within that. And so as we move through elementary, we want to add two areas. We want to add material that we get from the soil, minerals, and minerals that we get from the air. And so basically, if we look at a plant, what does a plant require to live? It needs light and water, but it also needs minerals that it's taking out of the soil. And so it's taking those in through its roots, and it's also getting minerals from the air in the form of carbon dioxide. And so if they don't have all of those things, they can't survive. But what about animals? We don't need light to survive, but we do need water, and we need plants, because those plants are going to contain minerals that we require. And then we're also going to get minerals out of the air in the form of oxygen. But there are some organisms, like the bacteria that live in the gut of this cow, that don't require oxygen. We call those anaerobic organisms. And so all of this matter we get from the earth or from plants that get it from the earth. But we also get energy, and that energy, again, comes from plants. As you move into middle school, you want to start talking about how that actually occurs. I mean, how does that matter? How does that energy get stored in organisms? And the big process is called photosynthesis. Now, you don't want to get too much into the details of the light reaction and the Calvin cycle and electron transport, but you do want to talk about photosynthesis and really the overall of what's going on. And so the nice thing about the word photosynthesis is it's broken into two parts. You've got the photo part and the synthesis part. And so in the photo part, a plant or, protists or algae or phytoplankton are all taking in light and water, and they're using the energy of that light to activate chemicals inside the plant. They then use that energy that's stored to convert carbon dioxide into sugar, and that's the synthesis part. We're making something out of the carbon dioxide. So let's go over that again. We start with the light and the water, and in the light reaction, we store that energy, and then we use that energy to take carbon dioxide and convert it into a sugar. So that's photosynthesis. What are we using the sugar for? Well, in plants, they're using the sugar to build the plant. And so the sugar that eventually makes the cellulose, that eventually makes the wood in a tree, comes from this process of photosynthesis. And it's important that you understand that that matter is actually coming in from the carbon dioxide that the leaves take in. And so most of the mass of a tree actually comes from the air, comes in from carbon dioxide. So they're taking in the sugar and they're using that to build, but they're also using that for energy. If we now look at organisms, so animals, where do we get our energy? Well, we get it from the food. In other words, it's in the sugar that was produced by the plants that we eat or the animals that ate the plants. And so the way we release that energy is through a process called cellular respiration. So how does that work? We're taking in food and oxygen, and we're using that to store energy inside our body that we can utilize. What are the byproducts of that? Water and carbon dioxide. And what's nice about that is that those are used, again, in photosynthesis. Let's go over that again. We take in food from the organisms or the plants that we eat. We combine using oxygen to store that energy inside us. And it's way more complex than that, but we can wait on that. And so there are some organisms, again, anaerobic, that can just take in food and they don't require oxygen to release that energy. Now that's kind of the energy where it's coming from, but we also build the parts of cells. And so plants are not only using that sugar to release energy, but they're building the parts of the cell. And we can metabolize that sugar and use it to make DNA and proteins and other things inside the cell. And so we're getting the matter of life from that. And so there's definitely a flow of energy. And that flow of energy goes from the sun to you. And so when you move your hand like that, the energy of your moving hand originally came from the energy in the sun. And so how does it flow? Well, it flows into our food through a process of photosynthesis. That energy is being stored in plants, and it's eventually being stored in our food. Now, along each of these steps, we're losing energy, and we're losing energy in the form of the heat. but we're taking that free energy of the sun and we're storing it in free energy of our food. We then use cellular respiration, and we use mitochondria to do this and release this energy to transfer energy to the muscles in the form of ATP. And so as you move into high school, then you can get into the more of the specifics of photosynthesis, cellular respiration, and even talking about ATP and how that energy is transferred. But the big picture is this: energy is going to flow through life in one direction. The energy from the sun becomes energy in the plants, energy in the animals, but eventually it leaves as heat. And if the sun isn't there, if the sun are to go out, then the plants die, the animals die as a result. And so it's a one-way direction. We're still conserving the energy. It's just that we're switching into a different form, eventually becoming heat. The matter is different. The matter on our planet is recycled over and over and over again. And so what makes me up, that matter, used to be in the air, or used to be in plants, or used to be in my food. I literally am what I eat. And it's recycled over and over and over on our planet. In other words, there's a set amount of water on our planet, and it's just recycled over and over again. And so that's matter, and that's energy, and I hope that was helpful.